Well, Philip and David, thank you very much for that introduction. I was delighted to know that I was going to be with my local MP this morning, but we haven't quite met, as on a number of different occasions in the past. My son, when he realised that I was sharing a platform with Norman Baker, quickly looked on the internet last night and came up with a picture of a square banana. And for any of you who read the press recently, then of course Norman Baker likens the likelihood of us eliminating cars from our central inner city areas with the likelihood of us supporting Europe and voting for square bananas. So I was going to show a slide of a square banana, but as the Minister has gone, I can't. If square bananas is about thinking differently, as Philip mentioned, then there is a relevance and there is a tie between how Mr. Baker thinks and some of the issues that I want to bring up. David was correct in saying that I sort of was caught in his eye when I was giving a presentation to, I think, about 200 undergraduates and postgraduate students at Imperial College. This must have been about 3 years ago when Terminal 5 was not yet complete. And I hope there are not too many people in this room here whose memory of Terminal 5 was simply the very poor opening experience. And instead was perhaps an industry that was pulled together, was invited to work in a different way, stepped up to a different level of output performance. And that was the sort of the scene that I was trying to set in front of these students, these future potential leaders of our industry, and how I could get them a little bit excited about what we do is more than just a transactional development of products. What we actually do is generate and create services for business outcomes for the long run. Now, I was asked to sort of talk in a sense about the state of the current industry. I always like to take a brief as a start point, but sort of go slightly beyond an upstream and downstream. So I want to talk about a report that I was asked to chair. It was launched last year. I called it, and I'll tell you why I called it, Never Waste a Good Crisis, which is actually positive. And whilst the Minister said that it sounds like a pretty challenging title, guys, there are great opportunities that lie ahead, and we need to understand and take lessons from other related industries as to how we can create the positives around that. Out of that came some of the big themes, and I'll talk about Egan and rethinking construction for a very short while, but what are the big themes that are going to populate the next 10 years of this sector's development? And in doing that, I want to talk something about innovation, sharing knowledge, which Philip mentioned very clearly, and of course I can't leave out the subject of potholes. We are very good at writing reports in this industry. I had absolutely no idea when I was asked to take on chair of an industry review how many good reports there were out there, and how many reports probably today are being written and authored and edited by long and good-serving members of our industry. Latham obviously is a name we all remember. Egan is a name that in 1999 he came up with, transferring ideas from other industries that had gone through crisis, that had sat on a burning platform and for lots of different reasons had to change. And of course he's very much associated with the automotive and car industry, being the CEO of Jaguar and Land Rover, and he's passionate about manufacturing, aerospace, and all those things that bring supply chains together. Latham, in a sense, if you took out one thing from Latham, is about get the team, the right team, sitting around a single table, get them to roll up their sleeves and get them to work professionally in a way that adds value to the process that they're there for. But if you go right back, then actually Simon in 1942 was talking. And some of the elements you can take out of all of these construction reports, and you will sort of recognize these. You know, are we still living in this era, or have we left this era apart? I'd suggest that it's probably a third. A third have moved on, a third are not quite sure, and a third are very much stuck back down in what I would call the dark ages. You know, fragmented and adversarial industries, a need to foster trust, collaboration and a new culture, and educational standards. You know, we still deliver people who come out academically clever and bright, but still very much sitting in a silo. We then recommend that they join an institution that is also sitting in a silo, and all our industry problems are actually horizontal and needed to be added together. So if you sort of recognise that, which I did, I was hugely disappointed that those were indeed from the Simons report in 1944 and the Emerson report in 1962, and therefore this is an issue that has been with us for 50, nearly 60 years. and it's about time we did something about it. I was warned before I made any recommendations that you better go and understand and look at the evidence. So I did look at the 10 reports that had been written since Egan, and there were some very good ones. I did understand the 10 years' worth of key performance indicators, so we have some good data about how this industry behaves and performs. And I was lucky enough to be given the output of a questionnaire that went out with 1,000 respondents of people who were passionate about what had happened and what needed to happen in the future. And I can actually say that from partnering, from products, from quality, from sustainability, actually the themes of Egan in 2009 when we landed this report were as resonating then as they were 10 years ago. And people still felt that strong leadership and quality and product leads and customers were very, very central. So there's nothing in a sense that Egan was suggesting 10 years ago that wasn't still relevant in today. And if you put them on one page, then it was about the drivers for change, the 4 key processes, and the things you can measure in terms of the targets. And crosses and ticks at the end, and I'll come on a little bit to what happened in the industry. Did we respond to it? And if so, why? And what some of the things. But I can say Egan and Nick Rainsford made a huge difference. You then had a minister who was the construction minister. He was in post for 4 years. And how many of you look around your own organisations where you move on your CEO on an average every 8 months? And since Rainsford left, then there have been 8 construction ministers in post, and no one has really, I think, been in post for long enough to understand some of the issues specific to this £125 billion industry that we're all part of. If you looked at what happened over those 10 years, and just to describe, the dark blue bars is the industry at large. That represents £120 billion. It was about 90 10 years ago. It's about £120 billion today. The light blue bars represents what was called the demonstration projects, the projects that wanted to put ideas from Egan forward and for it to be measured. So the advocate group, if you like. But that represented 1% of the industry, about £1 billion a year for 10 years, 1% of the whole total industry. From safety, actually quite a lot of good things have happened over the last 10 years in terms of safety. Not all to do with Egan, but I think that we have moved from an industry where, stuff happens. 130 people got killed in the late 1990s. Unfortunately, that is less and lower now. It is still not in a good place because we are still killing 60, 70 or 80 people a year. Cost and time was interesting. Over that 10-year period, demonstration projects were demonstrating that if you took some aspects of this change program called Egan, then actually you could make a difference in terms of time and cost output, which is what people were very, very much focused on. But, still half of public and private sector projects were either over time or over budget, and 50% of the reasons why that occurred was because the brief was changing or because the industry responded badly to change. We are not good at specifying what we need and delivering to that business outcome. The interesting and the rather disappointing and the one that told more of a story than any of it is that over those 10 years, the profitability, whether you were demonstration projects or whether you were industry at large, was sort of going up with the market. This was a time of 10 years of growth. This was a time when actually the revenue top and bottom line models of most organisations was doing what the shareholders and what the customers actually wanted and needed. And in a sense, during those 10 years, people did not have to change. There was no burning platform. Given an Egan or a Latham free on your doorstep one Christmas without even ordering it, people sort of thought, well, thank you very much, but it doesn't really relate to me. And therefore, people didn't have to change. And the reason they didn't have to change is because of those macroeconomic models and because very much how, on a microeconomic, how we procured things. Some parts of our industry procured in a sense that construction just simply doesn't matter. If you're in a house or you're a respective commercial office developer, then the cost of building, the cost of generating value through that built environment process was sort of pretty incidental to the market cost of a piece of land that had a house on it, or the price you could get for a commercial building and pass on the day of opening. There were some areas, and there were some people in that 10 years who broke the mould, who created their own microeconomic environments, and we'll come on to where those are and why those occurred, and why supply chains responded and reacted, and those clients should be applauded for creating the environment where innovation and knowledge share and long-term taxpayers and shareholder value is created. And there were blockers. So if the economic pull is why you change, why you do things, The blockers was the sort of was the supply side. Still, we lack the capability. Still, we lack the big leaders who get the big vision. When I was running T5, we had people who understand change management, succession planning, talent management, all the people side of our industry. And we had people who understood the technology. But it's a people business, our industry, and we are very, very, in general, badly supported. Misaligned processes, there are lots of different ways of doing things. Now that I am a supplier in the contracting organisation, I see every client's got a different process. When I was a client myself at BAA for 10 years, I thought I was being consistent, but since then I've heard from the supply chain that we were actually dishing work out to, and we were consistent and all over the place, and I suspect the BAA was probably one of the better client groups. And the fragmented industry, 120 different trade bodies alone, you cannot put the shape and size of our organisation, of our industry, onto one page. It just simply goes on for too long. So some of the blockers, and what I was very careful to do in trying to sort of cut the downward spiral of these blockers is to find exemplars in our industry. And if you go onto the internet, look up Never Waste a Crisis, there are dozens of fabulous examples from public sector, from local government, from private sector, from different sectors, who've created their own environment and their own case for change. And where you do that, then you can get transformational output in how this industry responds. Some of the big themes was about creating that right microeconomic climate. There's very little we can do about the fact that there's 20 or 30% less work going around right now. There's very little we can do about the fact that the carbon agenda is on us. Guys, this is the crisis. This is the crisis that we must not waste. But these will be the themes as we go forward. And something around the built environment, which is a 50, 60-year life cycle of an asset, rather than the act of construction when we leave an asset on this planet and then walk away with it. We have to extend our visibility of what we're doing and why. And if you go and talk to young people today coming to university, they want to be part of the solution. They don't want to be labelled as part of the challenge of decarbonising our industry and creating long-term value for our taxpayers and for our shareholders. And leaders who get the big pictures, leaders who can go into these organisations to run big programmes, to change if you're a local authority, to move the direction of travel of a big integrated supply chain. These are the people who we need to stay and not be tempted to go to other related industries, which all too often has happened in the past.